Mac Power Users, episode 732, Catching Up with Mike Vardy. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I'm joined by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hello, Stephen. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am Apple Vision Pro drunk right now. I've been doing so much Apple Vision Pro. I'm overwhelmed. What is reality, Stephen? What is reality?
It's someplace more colorful where your friends can see your eyes, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about Vision Pro and more power users today. Stephen wrote a really tiny review. What was it, about 6,100 words, something like that? So we've got some more thoughts on it. We're going to do that, more power users. That's the ad-free extended version of the show. If you're interested, you can check it over at relay.fm/MPU. But we got a guest today. One of my favorite people. Welcome back to Mac Power Users, Mike Vardy.
Glad to be here. Good to chat with both of you again.
Yeah, Mike is the productivityist, according to the internet, but he's so much more than that. We're going to be talking about that as we go through the show. I guess there's a couple announcements, though, before I dive into things. Stephen, what's going on with YouTube and the Mac Power Users?
Yeah, so people may remember a few years ago, we tried an experiment of uploading just the audio. We're not a video podcast. We're not cool like our friends on Upgrade, but uploading the audio to the YouTube channel. And that was kind of mixed success. And honestly, the workload made it where it didn't feel like it was quite worth it. But recently, YouTube rolled out a feature where you can point a YouTube channel at an RSS feed and it will auto ingest that feed and make each episode a video. It's just the show art, right? They're not doing like AI Sparks and Hackett floating around in space or anything. We have 700 and at the time, I think when I started, 729 episodes in the feed, and it took a long time to ingest them all. But they're all there now. There are this is still a work in progress. Like the show notes are kind of janky. I'm working on getting that fixed. A fun thing happened where I don't think if I told you this, David. We got a community strike against the channel because a link to a podcast in the show notes like 10 years ago, that URL, that podcast doesn't exist anymore, and that URL goes someplace bad on the internet. And like YouTube was like, no, what are you doing? You can't link to that. So I had to get that cleared up. It was all. It's like, this is like 2010. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
But it is there. So there's a link in the show notes. If that's how you want to get the show, it's available to you now on YouTube. We do not have plans currently to add video component to the show. We're really happy as an audio-only show, I think. But I know some people want to listen that way. And so it's just another option. So that link's in the show notes. It's in the sidebar at relay.fm/MPU. And it's just all automated now, which is great.
I just love that we have so many episodes that we kind of broke YouTube for a little while.
That. It would like do a couple hundred a day, and then literally was like, we'll resume tomorrow. I was like, okay, you go lay down, Google data center, and then we'll figure it out.
It's like, you guys aren't done talking yet?
I
know. That's a lot. I mean, if we average an hour and a half per episode, what are we now? 700, and this is episode 732.
Mm-hmm.
Quick math here, times 1.5. That's 1,100 hours of Mac Power Users. That's a lot of power users.
That is 45, almost 46 straight days of talking.
All right. Well, if you want to catch up, get started, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, get on it.
Take a nap once in a while.
Just like YouTube did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can limit yourself to 200 a day. That sounds about right.
Sorry, you guys are talking about naps, and I love naps. So
yeah. We're going to get to that. Mike and I are dear friends. There's a group of us. We call ourselves a Creators Guild, a bunch of people who make stuff on the internet, and we talk to each other every week or two and give each other advice and propping up. So Mike and I have we know all our dirty secrets between us, but I love your story, Mike. I mean, you started out at Costco.
Yeah, it's funny.
How did you get to where you are from where you were?
So when I was working for Costco, the biggest thing that I had to try to do when I moved out west with Costco, because I'm originally from the Toronto area, and then I moved out to Victoria, BC, which is where I am now, and they're opening up a new building here. And what they did was they said, we're going to put you in charge of not just the food court where you get the hot dog and soda, but we're also going to put you in charge of the service deli, which is where the rotisserie chickens are. Which is funny because every time you see news stories about Costco, they're typically about like why the rotisserie chicken is such a great deal, or what's the secret behind the $1.25 hot dog. So I was running both of those areas, and both run very differently. One is very much on demand, very reactive. It's not like you can cook a bunch of hot dogs up in advance and hope that you sell them. You have to be a bit more precise around that, or at least have some tolerance around it.
Well, wait a second. I've been to these gas stations where they're cooking a hot dog all day.
Yeah, that's not how Costco rolls.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, Jim Sinegal, who is the former CEO, co-founder, that was one of the places he went when he first showed up in any new building that was opening up. And the reason is he figured that if the food court was running really well, the concession area, then the rest of the building, was running in a much better position, because we were kind of like the last place people would go. You'd think we were like kind of the afterthought, but his attention to detail was kind of, centered around this $1.25 in Canada, $1.99, but hot dog and soda thing. But I'm trying to run both of these, and one is very much a customer service centric, one is more of a merchandising. So I'm trying to run all of these, and that's when I started to go down the rabbit hole of looking into time management and productivity, because there's only one of me, but there's these two different departments at opposite ends of the building. And what happened is that stuff is where a lot of what I do now was initially rooted in, the idea of stuff that's simple, some stuff that's durable, flexibility. You have to keep all of that stuff in mind when you're in an operation like that. And eventually over time, my time at Costco ran down. I eventually decided that I didn't want to, have to be spread out so thin. I wanted to get into more of an entrepreneurial slant. And so I stepped down to part-time and started to work online, building, initially building a productivity parody site called Eventualism, and then ultimately becoming the thing I was parodying by a series of interviews with Seth Godin and David Allen and things like that for podcasts way back in the day. Like, we're talking way back. And before YouTube even had to think about taking a nap when uploading podcasts. But the point is that eventually what happened was I decided to just leave Costco. I took another jobs in between just to kind of build a bit of a nest egg. And then, I started to write for sites like Cult of Mac, which is how we all met. Actually, I was looking a couple of weeks ago, Sean Blanc sent me a photo of all of us out to lunch or something like that. There's a few of us. Brett Terpstra's there. Stephen, you're there. Ben Brooks is there. Sean. I'm like, oh my goodness, has it been that long? She looks so young.
It has been that long, my friend.
But so I was writing for Cult of Mac. Then I started writing for Life Hack, The Next Web. And eventually I decided to go on my own. And we're talking close to 15 years now of me doing this in a full-time capacity, and still taking some of those lessons that I got from Costco back in the day. But that's where it all started, is just doing things like using different colored pens for the different departments, and, starting to develop things like themed days. Even back then I had to, decide, well, if I'm going to be in the food court for this day, this is what this day needs to look like. If I'm going to be in the service deli, this is what this day needs to look like. And I kind of taken some of those lessons along with others I've learned along the way and built this business that it gets better and better every year.
And I'm very proud of my friend Mike Vardy, who has gone from the Costco hot dog department to he's about to release his first big time book. And we're going to talk about that as we get into the show. But Mike, we need your bona fides. You're in a Mac Power users. What are you driving these days?
So I was with a Mac Mini and an iMac for a while, but maybe it was the year when shortly after they came out, I got enamored with the Mac Studio because I wanted to keep my main work happening in my study here in the basement of my house. And I was really conscientious I didn't want to have a laptop. I have my iPad Pro, and I had other iPads before that. And I figured I could do most of my portable computing on my iPad, and anything that needed to be done that required Mac OS or some kind of external, implementation, I could just use a desktop for that. And so I actually have the Mac Studio, the M1 Max. It's a 1 terabyte. And it is, I'm not even using it to most of its potential. Like, I mean, I am doing some live streaming. I am doing, obviously, a lot of audio work from time to time, video, getting more into video as well. So that's my primary computer. It's what we're using right now. I've got my Rodecaster Pro hooked up to it and all that fun stuff. But I would say that in terms of my main driver when I'm not, either sitting at this standing desk or stand desk, or when I'm out, is my iPad Pro 11-inch. I've got the, I think it's the 4th gen. And I love this guy. I love that. I've got the Logitech keyboard that attaches to it, which is kind of nice. I was looking at the Apple one, but just decided to go with this one instead because it turns it more into a laptop for the way I like to use it. So that's I would say this is the equivalent of my laptop. I think the other reason I went this way is when I travel, coming from Canada to the US and doing a lot of cross-border travel, the last thing I want is a $3,000 to $4,000 laptop kind of being skirted away. So I preferred to spend that money on the computer at home, and then I'll go with the iPad when I'm on the road. In terms of my phone, I have the iPhone 14 Pro. Both my iOS devices are 512. I try to mirror them so that I know that they've got the same kind of storage on them. What else am I? LG 32-inch ultra fine screen. I didn't really need anything more than that. And then in terms of like reading,
just 32 inches. That's all you need.
Just 32 inches. Just 32. That's it. Well, I don't like multiple screens. I don't really use dual screens, and I think it's because when I was working for the Next Web, it kind of gave me anxiety because I was running 2 screens, having to watch all the tech news coming up. And then all the stuff that was going on that. So I like having one screen. I do like the with the iPad, I can have a second screen if I want. But this 32-inch LG just does the trick. I've looked at a couple others. I did look at the Mac Studio display, and it's just, I couldn't justify the cost for what at this point. And then, I have a bunch of other digital devices.
I want to get into that in a minute. But before we talk about that, this iPad Pro is your laptop. Mm-hmm. What are the types of workflows you're doing on it? Where, and frankly, where are the stumbling blocks, if there are any?
There's a few. So for the longest time, there were things that I couldn't do even with ConvertKit on my iPad Pro that I can do now. They've I think thanks to the kind of the merging or meshing of mobile OSs and desktop OSs, things have become easier. But I can tell you the things that I typically don't do. I mean, I won't do audio recordings on it very often. I have the equipment to do it, but I mean, I'm sitting here in my study with, all the other things. I might as well use it. So it's kind of like, I actually remember being at the Podcast Movement Conference, Podcast Movement Evolutions last year. And I brought the microphones that would work with my iPad Pro, and it did okay. Same thing with my phone, because I can plug it. I've got some portable mics that will plug into my phone. So I can use those in a pinch. But the workflows I typically use my iPad Pro for are, text-based, are writing, are, I'll do video editing on it. I have a video editing software that I use that I rather like, that I've been using for a number of years. And it just keeps getting better and better. It's now multi-platform. I've gotten better with using the iPad for video editing. Audio is still not there, at least for what I use. But typically, I can do almost everything that I want on my iPad. There are some websites that act finicky. Circle is one. So I use the Circle app for my community, my Time Crafting Trust community on the iPad and on the iPhone. But if I want to start adding certain things to it, like imagery that's got like a cover image, or even some of the menus when you're using the iPad versus a laptop or even a desktop, some of the things aren't aligned properly. So there are some things that I can't quite use my my mobile devices for. ClickUp, which is what I use for task management, it does most things well. But if I want to start, adding and manipulating some of the deeper settings in ClickUp, I really do need to be on a desktop. So for the most part, I can knowing that though, knowing those constraints is helpful, because then I know that, when I'm looking at contextual work, like, okay, these things I must be at my Mac Studio for, like I must be, which is, not necessarily a bad thing, because it kind of centers my focus and creates some concentration around those particular types of tasks. Whereas with, a bunch of other ones, I could even use my phone for certain things, right? Like writing, I could write on my phone, I could write on my iPad, I could write on my, I have another writing device that I'm sure we'll touch on that I use specifically for book writing.
Oh yeah. I have a lot of questions when we get there. Don't worry.
Yeah. But I mean, contextual work, I think it can be really helpful in that those just because a device can do everything doesn't mean it should, right? And so for me, knowing that my iPad Pro has some limitations, although they are far fewer than when I first started using the iPad as my primary kind of laptop or portable device, it is getting much better. But there's definitely a few things that I'm like, you know what, this is much better to be on my Mac Studio than on any of these iOS devices.
Yeah, you can even treat those constraints sometimes as a question mark. It's like, well, it can't edit video.
Yes.
Well, should I be the one that edits the video?
That's absolutely true. So there have been some things where, and I do have an assistant who, you know, if I come up with something that I want to add to ClickUp, but it's not working, it won't work so well for mobile. Now that's not even a question. I just say, hey, Sarah, can you go into ClickUp and do this? And they'll do it. So yeah, it does create this idea of, well, is this a task I should be doing at all? And if not, then I should be delegating it. So yeah, it does create that. There's a level of friction that creates, like you said, questions and even some strategic kind of workflows that allow me to kind of think differently about, well, is this something I should be doing at all? And if so, okay, well, now I know where I need to be to do it.
All right. And so Mike, there's another thing you have that we have to talk about, because I was with you at a retreat and you pulled this monstrosity out of your bag, and it's your Hemingwrite. Tell us about it. Steven, I don't even know if you know this product exists.
Oh,
you got it.
Don't sell me short, man. I know. Right. I've looked at this webpage 1,000 times over the years.
Oh, okay. That tells me something about you, Steven. That does. All right. Explain this thing to us, Mike.
Okay. So it is it's basically a digital typewriter that connects to a variety of services online, such as Google Docs or Google Drive, I guess, technically. You can sync it to Dropbox or even Evernote. And it's basically a word processor, right? It's like an old school word processor that syncs online. It's distraction free. It is, the Hemingwrite is a special edition. It's the Hemingway one. It came with, as you mentioned, Dave, it came with a like a little briefcase or attaché case with like a nice little cloth that you use to clean it. It's very, you know, it definitely is extra. Let's put it that way. In more ways than one. But what I like about it is it really forces you to focus on just writing. Like, you're not going to edit on it. You're not going to do much else. I will say that there's a couple of different Freewrite options, because that's the company that makes it. It's actually Astra House. Freewrite is now the name of the company. I think they used to be called Astra House. And the one that I have is very clickety-clackety. It's got a mechanical keyboard. So I am loath to sit in a quiet place to type with it in public, because people look around like, why is this so loud? But there are some other options. They have like the Traveler, which is another one that is, it folds into like this almost tiny, it's very, very small, almost the size of a keyboard, actually, like a typical Keychron mechanical keyboard, which is what I use as my primary keyboard anyway. But they also released a new one called the Alpha, which reminds me a lot of, and I don't know if you remember the Alpha Smart Neo. That was like a long time ago. Yeah. So, you know, Steven, you remember that one, right? Like, this one basically looks like it's the new version of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did a video on the Alpha Smart like 5 years ago on my channel, and it's fascinating. I think the idea is very similar, right? It's a tiny screen. You have a keyboard. The Alpha Smart has internal memory, and then you can send it over a wire to Google Docs. I forget which documentary now, so I'm not going to name it. But remember, there were like 2 documentaries about the Fire Festival. Do you remember that thing? Where, like,
yeah, I know the one there was one on Netflix I remember watching for sure.
I think the Hulu one. I'm pretty sure it was the Hulu one. They contacted me because apparently the guy behind that festival, which was a giant scam, was super into the Alpha Smart. And I, at the time, had the only 4K footage of one on YouTube. And so they paid to license my footage for that documentary. I got like a royalty check. It was It was wild. My most profitable YouTube video by far. But the idea is Yeah, just sell footage to Hulu, and money comes in.
You babies don't know the Tandy WP2. This
come
is
on.
the
I
great
remember that.
granddaddy of this. Yeah.
I'm not that much younger. I remember that.
It's the thing. All these things. The idea of a keyboard with an 8-line LCD display, and it's so funny to me that it's coming back. Right, people, because of this distraction environment we live in, they're like, look, I can't be trusted. I just need a thing that has a keyboard and captures text, and doesn't have any ability to load apps or any of the other interruptions.
I think George R.R. Martin has literally has a computer where he glued the Ethernet, like an end of an Ethernet cable, into the Ethernet port, and has removed the he literally turned a PC into basically a word processor.
Yeah, he uses a WordStar very famously, which is this ancient word processor.
Yeah.
I mean, David, you're right. The idea never dies, right? The minimal writing computer, it never dies, never goes away. I do think in particular, the Freewrite stuff is interesting because clearly there's a level of polish to it. I mean, Mike, does this thing weigh as much as it looks? It looks like you could kill somebody with this thing.
It's pretty heavy. Yeah. The one I have is pretty heavy. I mean, the Alpha is lighter. I think they're going to send me, as of this recording, I think that Adam and the team are going to send me a review unit to look at, because I've looked at the Travelers. The Traveler's light. And the one thing I liked about the Traveler was, even though it didn't have the mechanical keyboard, it had, it had those old school touch type keys that were, it's kind of a weird mix between what an Apple keyboard would be like versus a mechanical. It's a nice fine middle ground.
Yeah.
I really liked it. What I liked about that one is that you could just fold it up. The screen's not exposed in the Traveler, which I liked. So you could just fold it up and take it with you, and it is quieter. But yeah, the Hemingwrite is by far, it's the limited edition. It's the most extra. I'm a Hemingway fan, so I kind of fell into that trap. And yeah, you could argue it because these things aren't cheap either. So what you're paying for is not only it's quality. It's a quality machine for sure. The parts, everything is put together quite nicely. The keyboard is phenomenal. They've changed some of the way that they've done the screens over the years because they've been around for a while. But it is that point of, to your point, David, the idea of, even we're seeing paper planners and that stuff come back with earnest, the bullet journal. There's always going to be these machines or these tools that are this is for this, and so that I can keep myself from doing other things. And I believe, one of the things I had that I made sure I did is that the Hemingwrite, the Freewrite has its own, I see it every time I walk into my study. So it's not put away. It's not I need to see it. So it's okay, because I'm working on a book or I'm writing, that's what I'm doing. So that machine needs to be front and center so that I don't lose sight of it. Because it's very easy to get swept up into other things that you're working on as a business, when you're running a business. And there's software that will do all of this. We've seen it before. There's IA Writer. There's tons of them that will allow for focused writing. But there was just something about the fact that I could write on this thing in a messy draft, get it into Google Drive, get it. And they also have their own thing called Postbox that it automatically syncs to. So even if you don't sync it to one of those other tools, it will sync to its own kind of document storage facility. There is something about when I sit down to use that thing, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And so for somebody who maybe has ADHD or somebody who really wants to be intentional about writing, this device or any of the series of Freewrites, I think it might be what you're looking for.
Well, I had all these judgmental things I was going to say, you don't need a separate device, use an iPad with the focus mode. And then as I was about to utter the words, I realized I spent $4,000 on a similar device a couple weeks ago, where I've created a writing mode where I'm at Yosemite, blah, blah, blah. So, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
At least the Freewrite comes with a usable keyboard, and you don't need a Bluetooth one.
That's true. You could have got a fleet of Freewrites for what I paid for this thing. So there you go.
And not the creepy embalmed persona thing. I just was on a call with a few of my community members, and one of them has the Vision Pro and decided to be at one point on the call in the persona mode, and I'm and someone pointed out that he looked like he had been freshly embalmed.
Yeah,
And I was like, wow,
Thanks for the visual,
kind of,
Mike. Thanks.
yeah, sorry. But that's kind of, it is a bit, I mean, at this point, at this juncture, but we've seen this before with any new technology. It's like, we're going to see how it plays out. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, contextual, like with, the funny thing is to your point, Stephen, is that this technology is not new. It's just, people want to devote their attention to certain things and there's a market for it.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to 1password.com/MPU today and get 20% off your account. 1Password is so much more than just a password application. One of my favorite features of 1Password is what they call secure notes. So no matter where you're using 1Password, and you can use it on a lot of platforms, all the Apple stuff, the web, Windows, you can use 1Password to keep secure notes that are only accessible behind your 1Password vault. We all have bits of information we'd like to carry around with us, but we don't want anybody that can unlock our phone to be able to read it. That's what secure notes are. In it, I keep medical histories, social security numbers, all sorts of data that I consider to be critical and I want to have with me, and I don't want the bad guys to ever get access to it. And that's exactly what you get. The only way you get in the 1Password secure note is to have first the password for the phone to unlock the phone, and then the 1Password password to get through to that too. Having this double lock makes me feel safe and secure, putting important data on my phone so it's accessible to me when I need it. And I get that because I have 1Password. That's just one feature you get with a whole suite of security features that come with a 1Password subscription. You also get easy sharing, watchtower protection, and of course, it also tracks your passwords. Go check it out today. 1Password, secure by design, private by default, and verified by experts. The internet's a dangerous place. You need a team at your back, and that should be 1Password. Go to 1password.com/MPU today to get 20% off your account and start using your own secure notes. Thanks 1Password for all of your support of the Mac Power Users.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about hardware, but you're using all of these devices, so I assume there's some sort of software involved as well. What does that look like?
So software-wise, for the longest time, I was someone who went through all the apps, right? Like it was part of the job that I had. And I'd say over the last 5 years or so, I've become less, exploratory about the apps I use for the most part. So I think when it comes to productivity, which is my bread and butter, it's what my whole business is based on, improving productiveness and one's relationship with time. I want to look at my task management solution. And I know some people seem to think, I've read this and I don't understand it, but to each their own, is that people are putting like project management tools in a different category than task management tools. And I think that we're at a point where they can be one and the same. Notion, for example, is one that can operate as both. I don't use Notion per se as my primary, but I'm exploring it a bit more because there's a lot of people use it. And it does have that flexibility factor. It kind of reminds me of what Evernote was like back when Evernote first started, is that there was a lot of versatility and flexibility, and I'm big on that. But the tool I use for my business in terms of task management and even project management is ClickUp. To graduate from like Asana, which is what I used before, to use ClickUp, there's so many all-in-one aspects to it. There's ClickUp Docs, which means we can, have a bunch of shared documents that we are using. Plus, it syncs up with Google Drive very nicely. So if we want to use anything that I've written on the Freewrite for something, we can as well. The scalability factor with Teams is very high with ClickUp. There's a bunch of different views. It's just very, very versatile. But what I like about it compared to, say, a tool like Notion or Airtable or any of these other tools that you can kind of modify to make work for you, there is some constraints as to what ClickUp is. So ClickUp is meant to, act as primarily a task management or project management tool. So it allows me to kind of not have to fiddle with some of those. I can fine tune it, but I don't need to, reinvent the wheel or download a template or do anything like that. So, and my team and I both, we all like using it. My podcast producer, who is also now becoming my video producer, as well as my operations assistant and myself. And anyone I bring in to help out, there is more familiarity around ClickUp now.
What do you think, Steven? Should we move MPU over to ClickUp now?
No.
Because you're at Notion, right? You guys, it's Notion for you guys?
It is Notion,
yeah. I just want to debate them. That's all. It's good. Yeah.
It is interesting to me that Notion and ClickUp, I'm surprised that there's not more crossover between the two in terms of I'm actually surprised that ClickUp doesn't have as more people that use it compared to Notion, but I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Notion can be almost anything and ClickUp doesn't have that as its advantage, but it is a cautionary tale because Evernote could be anything, and look where Evernote is now, right? Like Evernote has changed a lot, right?
I think Evernote's problems were a lot involved with management and decisions.
Fair.
So
fair. In terms of personal, though, I don't use that. I don't use ClickUp for personal task management because I do like to keep those things separated. So I still use Todoist for personal, and I really like it. I think people can use Todoist, even in a professional capacity. I have a few clients that use it. And again, it doesn't necessarily scale as big as ClickUp or definitely not as Notion, but it is inexpensive. It is powerful under the hood, but it doesn't look like it would be. It's very clean. There's a lot there, and it's multi-platform. So again, when I'm working with a lot of clients, both those tools, as I mentioned, they don't just work for Mac. They're multi-platform. Email, again, I use two different tools for email because I do like to keep these things separate, especially with team members. So I use Front for business email. And it works really well because it kind of acts as a bridge between, communications and task management, and that you can easily tether it to ClickUp or Todoist if you wanted, or in a variety of other tools. But also it's got a calendar built in. You can even do chatbots on your website with it if you want. There's a lot of versatility. It's pricey, but I like it because if there's a task that comes in, and this is old school thinking where, if a task comes in via email, you got to get into your task management tool. Like typically that's what you would do. But now we're at a point where there's so much, inputs coming at external demands that there's instances where we don't necessarily need it to become a task inside of ClickUp. So that's where we can have conversations around emails inside of Front. And if we decide to make it a task in ClickUp, we can. So there's a lot of it acts as a really great communications dashboard for us. That's the business one. But for personal, I'm using Spark. Spark just works for me. I could go back to Apple Mail if I want. And I'm noticing that I am leaning more towards some of the Apple products back in that direction, as well as some of the stuff that SetApp offers for some of my other things. Calendar, I'm not totally set on. I have BusyCal for my calendar app because it's part of SetApp, and I really like what SetApp does. I like the whole Netflix of the Netflix for Mac apps and iOS apps. I really like that, but they don't offer it for iOS. So then I'm using the calendar app, or I'm using timing.is, which is another calendar app that I was introduced to. Of course, there's Notion Calendar. So I was with Fantastical for a while. The pricing bump definitely gave me pause. And so I have paused my use of Fantastical. So I'm in a state of flux with my calendar apps right now. But I want something that can, that's going to allow me to do a lot with it. I use SavvyCal and stuff for booking appointments and stuff like that, but I'm not opposed to finding something that will necessarily do all that stuff. And I know Fantastical it was really powerful. So maybe I'll go back to that.
So let's just catch up a little bit. So on email, I'm curious because Spark Mail also has a collaboration function, and it's a lot less expensive, than Front. What's the differences for you? Like if people are out there running their own business, where's the dividing line for you for email collaboration between Spark and Front?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the ability to have it can act as a communication hub. So you can bring in things like your social media, like Twitter mentions or X mentions or whatever. You can do all elements of communication. Plus, it can actually act as a customer service tool as well. There are some CRM components to it. It is what you're paying. I'm barely scratching the surface of what I can do with it based on the payment that is required. And I'm in a partnership with them. Like I've had some dealings with them in the past, so my rate may be lower than what others would be paying if they were to jump on board. But there's something about the flow that it offers that we've just gotten so used to as a business. My team members like it. They like the fact that they can click on the calendar link and see all the calendar appointments that I have and make changes to community stuff if they want right from within Front instead of going to say Google Calendar or doing something like that. The web chat stuff, the stuff for your website, the chatbot element, that's compelling because to be able to do that all from within one app as opposed to using something like ManyChat or Intercom or something like that can be helpful as well. So Spark, it kind of, I fell into Spark mainly because it became part of the setup suite. And I'm like, I want something for my personal email that maybe has a little bit more power under the hood than mail.app does. And Spark was kind of where I settled. But I remember using, again, email I've used Dispatch in the past. I've used SaneBox, still have elements of SaneBox that I kind of play within the apps that I use. Gosh, there's been so many different, there was an email app that I can't even remember at this point.
They come and go.
Come and gone, right? So I think if I was to move away from Front to something else right now, I think that the friction with my team members would probably be more to bear than I'm willing to do right now. But yeah, there's lots of options out there.
What are some of your favorite options or features in Spark? You landed on that one.
I think I like the fact that, the biggest feature was it was part of SetApp, to be honest. Like the fact that I could use it for Mac OS or iOS was like, that's a big bonus. I do like the, some of the ways that it operates in terms of like the smart sorting. I rather like it does it more intuitively than some of the other ones that I've played with in the past, like the Smart 2.0. I do, but most of the other stuff is already, I'm so ingrained in some of the other apps that I've used that canned responses, signatures, all that stuff. It makes it easy to get to that stuff. I think that's probably what it is the ease of use. The UI is probably what led me to it.
And I would add to it that Spark is a very opinionated mail app. And I think a lot of people like it or don't like it.
Yeah.
And if it's something you're curious, especially if you have a SetApp subscription, turn it on for a week and see if it works for you. But they definitely want you to use their workflow. Like trying to take like some other workflow and apply it in there feels like you're swimming against the current. But if you're okay with their workflow, it's a very efficient app.
Yeah, that's true. It is very much, it is interesting when I go from one app to the other. I had to change the gestures because their gestures were different than Front's gestures on iOS. So I had to go in and change those, which is you can do. But yeah, it's very much like this is the way you should go through email. It's kind of Superhuman's a lot like that too, I think, which I know a lot of people are using Superhuman. And I think the reason I shied away from that, because that was another option when we were going to use Front and then even bringing on another one was they had that I think it was a data leak or something like privacy issue that came up. I'm like, well, I'm going to probably steer clear of that if that's an issue. So, and again, using 1Password, I always keep my eyes open for any kind of weird security issues that can pop up or password leaks or dumps or what have you.
And then switching back to calendars, you're a guy who thinks a lot about productivity. What do you think about this trend of these new like web-based calendar apps that include tasks? Basically, they let you time block off your task list into your calendar. That's the big feature in my impression of them. But what do you think of this kind of growing movement of these web-based calendar/task apps?
It's funny. I think that there is a good aspect to having time dedicated to tasks, right? But I think that what happens is, and I know you and I've had this discussion before, David, about hyperscheduling and what your meaning of hyperscheduling is compared to what mine is. And when I think of someone who's hyperscheduling themselves, is that they are not leaving any flexibility within their schedule. And I think that what can happen with these calendar apps that are saying, here's when these tasks could be done, is that if you don't go in there and integrate the human component to it, or if you get too narrow with your focus in that, like, hey, these tasks should be done at this time, it's not taking into account some of the nuances that could be going on either during that day or that week or what have you. And I think that the propensity for people to just let those apps kind of dictate things as opposed to going in and fine tuning them, I think that's the concern I have, is that people are just going to we've seen this before. This is not new either. Like, oh, I've got OmniFocus, therefore I'm going to be more productive. Well, not necessarily. No, that's not how it works. Like, there are going to be things you need to throw in there. So I think that, along with the advent of AI and saying, hey, just give me your tasks and we will input them in your schedule based on, this number of factors. Unless, again, garbage in, garbage out. If you're not being, I'm a night owl. Oh, well, that's going to change the schedule, as opposed to if you're not. Or, we had 3 meetings in a row and that's going to drain me. Well, too bad. This is when this best fits. So I think that leaving it to the machine to dictate that on its own without having some curation there, I think that's the concern I have. I do believe that, again, time theming is essentially time blocking, but with maybe a little bit more constraints to it. What it does is it kind of compels the person to say, okay, well, today is Tuesday. Tuesday's overarching focus is this. Therefore, I should be focusing on these types of tasks. I think the human element is really key here. And my concern is that these apps may cause some users just to remove that and kind of go down that path without being thoughtful or considerate about it.
We talked earlier about your mixed use of the Mac and the iPad. When you're looking at maybe a new software title to bring into your business to help run things, or maybe evaluating something to change, how much weight do you put on what the iPad experience is like? Like you mentioned ClickUp a little while ago, that some stuff you need to do in ClickUp you just can't do on the iPad, and so you've got to either wait till you're at a Mac or have someone else help you with it who's at a desktop. But it seems like the trade-offs are worth it for you for ClickUp. So what does that rubric look like?
Yeah, that's essentially it. Is I will look at what a tool can do for the team more so than just me, right? So, and I think this goes back to when I started to explore people who were, there's a lot of people who don't use Macs, right? And so I had to kind of think bit broader in those strokes. And, when it comes to a tool and I noticed this with even Asana and other tools, is that there were certain things that you just couldn't do on mobile that you can do on desktop. And so when I think about these things, I do think about versatility. So that does come into play. Can I use this on my iPad and on my desktop? And will the experience be similar? What will I lose on my iOS devices as compared to, being on the desktop? What will that look like? And for the most part, Stephen, the friction I'm willing to put up with if it's, using like LumaFusion is a great example. That's what I use for video editing, is LumaFusion. I alluded to it earlier. It was built for mobile first. It was built for the iPad. That's what they, and now it's available on Mac and you can get it on different platforms. So when it started as a mobile, I'm like, okay, great. Well, the desktop experience will be very different, and it, or won't be very different, and it isn't. So I will look at where I will be doing most of the work for those things, and how much flexibility and versatility do I need or do I want? And then to David's point earlier, if it's something that I can't do, I'm like, well, can somebody else do it? Like, will somebody else be able to do that from their machine? Yes. Okay, great. Well, then that's not an issue. As compared to, oh, no one else can do this, then that might be an issue. A good example would be, I'm actually looking at this right now. Maybe you guys can help me, is my audio editor, because I'm starting to do some of the content editing for the podcast again, because I want, now that I'm giving my audio editor more video work, I want to kind of spread things out a bit and figure it's a good opportunity for me to lean back into the content a bit. And he's like, well, you need to have a audio. I want it to be at the highest output rate. And GarageBand only does like 24-bit. I'm like, well, what program should I get? Another program? Do I need another app? Or do I just decide, what, forget it. You're just going to do the content stuff because you've got the audio files, and I'll just, put timestamps in or what have you. So I do think about this stuff, but ultimately it is, if the app will work across multiple platforms, that's the first thing I look at. And then if there's any friction, is it friction I can live with based on how I want to use my devices, either here or when I'm on the road?
Yeah, I think all that makes sense. I think most of us make those decisions, maybe even sort of like subconsciously, like, oh, I like this task manager, but the iPhone version doesn't do this or that,
Right.
or the mobile version's great, but the Mac app is Electron, so I don't, I feel like sometimes contextualizing those decisions can be important.
Yeah, I feel that we were talking about SparkMail earlier. It's like, I like SparkMail. I'm using it right now for a variety of reasons. I hate that it's not a native Mac app. I hate that about it,
Yeah, it is interesting. Like Todoist is a good example of that. Like, Todoist is, you can get a native version of it, but it's using, what do they call it? A PWD. I think it's called whatever it is. It's basically a web app.
Yeah,
but
PWA.
they've wrapped it. That's it, PWA. So, I don't like that necessarily, but that's okay because I'm using the web versions of it in most cases. And actually, to be honest, I rarely use Todoist on my desktop at all because the mobile version is so good.
Yeah.
And that's a rare, like, that's the interesting part about like different apps is that sometimes they think mobile first, and like LumaFusion would be an example. Todoist is, they may not be thinking mobile first, but they certainly aren't forsaking it or ignoring it. But like Asana, for the longest time, their mobile app was garbage. I mean, it's better now, but, and again, it depends on what you want to do. For years, subtasks were like a pain in the butt. Repeating subtasks in any app were hard to do. They were just hard to code and and I mean, I've talked to many different developers about this. Like, yeah, it's really hard to have a recurring subtask inside of a task like, it's just challenging to do that. And then to try to make it so that it works mobile and desktop or web-based, it's challenging. So I get that, especially when you're dealing with smaller development teams. But yeah, at the end, there's certain apps where I'm like, I really wish that this would work this way across all, across the board. I just feel lucky, like I struck gold when I do. I mean, even Notion's mobile experience was it's still not the best, but it's better. But at first, that's one of the things that actually probably pushed me away from Notion compared to, again, probably because of the iPad, compared to say using ClickUp or even Todoist. Was Notion's mobile was not that. That's why I stuck with Evernote for so long. The only thing that pushed me away from Evernote was just pricing and restrictions. And, I'm clearly not their customer base anymore. But yeah, I mean, these are things that I don't know that people think about nearly as much because I think they, or they don't, there's not a lot of time to think about it for some people. They just don't like, well, this is the app that a lot of people use, so I'm just going to use it and fiddle around and play with it until it works the way I want it to. And that's fine too. I just hate it when people switch from app to app to app to app to app, which is part of the reason why people end up not being as productive as they could be, because they're moving from app to app to app, or they're fine tuning an app and fiddling with it instead of actually, saying, hey, what am I using this app for in the first place? Maybe I should actually do that stuff.
Well, and I think there's a flip side of that for our audience, of which I am the representative member, where you obsess on, well, this app is great, but their iPad app isn't any good. But you don't stop to think, well, will I ever actually use this app on the iPad?
Right.
Maybe it's okay that it's not any good because this is a thing I would do at the desktop or whatever.
Exactly. I mean, the iPad for me has become such a, it's weird because I rarely use it without the physical keyboard attached. I do use it occasionally, mainly because of Text Expander. But I mean, when I'm using it with the keyboard attached, it just like I'm on a laptop. Like that, we're at that point, and it took a while. But I mean, we're almost to the point. And I mean, I know that this has been like kind of the meshing of iOS and Mac OS, and it's working. I mean, for the most part, when you're developing something now for the Mac, it's iOS. I mean, mobile computing is where it's at, right? So you're developing for mobile and desktop and web. Like none of them should be more hierarchically ranked than another. And I think we're seeing that because you're going to see more people, I bet. I mean, unless Apple changes their philosophy and just says, hey, you know what, we're not going to really push the iPad because we want the laptops. But you're seeing more, I mean, why would you need a laptop if the iPad will do most things? I don't know. I mean, my son is using my old iPad Pro and he doesn't have a computer. He's able to do all his schoolwork and everything from it. The alternative is a Chromebook at school. And he's able to do a lot of that stuff, I think almost all of it, on the iPad.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by using offer code MPU at squarespace.com/Mac squarespace.com/MPU. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. With Squarespace, you can stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything, your products, services, and even the content you create. Squarespace has got everything you need all in one place. And with Squarespace, that starts with their Fluid Engine. It's their next-generation website design system to unlock your creativity more easily than ever before. You start with the best-in-class website template and then customize every design detail with reimagined drag-and-drop technology for desktop or mobile. That's important. Any site you build with Squarespace is going to look good on any platform. With Squarespace, you can stretch your imagination, and all of that is ready to go on any new Squarespace website. You can sell your products in an online store. Whether you sell physical or digital products, Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online, and they have built-in analytics, so you can learn where your site visits and sales are coming from and analyze which channels are most effective. This allows you to improve your website and build a marketing strategy based on your top keywords or most popular products and content. Squarespace is, for me, the starting place of a website. If you need to build a website, I always start with Squarespace. That recommendation has got only easier over the years as they continue to add new features, making it super easy to make a very powerful website. They've got all the tools you need with one easy solution. Anybody looking to get their business online should check out Squarespace. And if you go to squarespace.com/MPU, you get a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MPU and use that offer code MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/MPU and code MPU when you decide to sign up to get that 10% off your first purchase and to show your support for the Mac Power users. Our thanks to Squarespace for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM. So, Mike, I teased this at the beginning, but you're about to release a book. Tell us about that.
So I've had a couple of books out in the past. The Front Nine came out, over 10 years ago, which was released by Diversion Books. It was called The Front Nine, How to Start the Year You Want Anytime You Want. And it's been a long time since I've released another book with such a, quote, fanfare or a launch. And it's called The Productivity Diet. The subtitle is still actually being finalized as we're going through the final phases of editing and galley reading and all that stuff. But it's basically the concept behind the book is a few years ago, I wrote a book called The Productivityist Playbook, where I was offering plays and things that people could do to be, to actually be productive instead of doing productive, which is what I alluded to actually in the last segment, the idea of just, fiddling with things and not actually using the tools to get the right things done. The productivity diet is now centered around why do we do what we do? What do we, and how do we do the right things for us at the right time without forsaking quantity along the way? So, there's talk about qualitative and quantitative productivity. There's, and what we do inside of this book is instead of offering, say, plays like the playbook did, we offer recipes because, the idea of a productivity diet. So here are some things you can try. They're smattered throughout the book as well. But it's basically taking my time crafting framework and kind of showing people how to use that to have a productive lifestyle. Because that's the other thing about diet too. We hear the word diet and people think, for the most part, I'm going to do this for a little while and then I'll, either get in better shape or lose weight and then I'll be fine and I'll just do this, cyclically. Whereas a diet really is a lifestyle choice. And that's, to me, what productivity is. And to be productive is to live a lifestyle that promotes that. And that's what this book is designed to do, is to help people with simple, flexible, durable, and sustainable ways to, be truly productive.
All right. So now give us the workflows. We're Mac Power users, and we know you got all this gear. How do you go about writing a book, and what are you using to do it?
Well, one of my favorite tools to grab things from is I will use the way I kind of go through it is I spend, if we're looking at a schedule, is as a night owl, I don't create in the morning. I consume early in the day. So I will use some of the reading tools that I have. And again, this is helpful to have the iPad, but, using things like Readwise, Reader, which is Readwise's, reading tool, Instapaper. I will gather up over the course of weeks and weeks and weeks material that resonates with me. And, Apple News gives me some of that. And, I actually it's funny. I'll get occasionally links from members of the Creative Guild, Creators Guild, like we talked about. They'll say, "Hey, Mike, this might be useful for you in this." And so I gather that stuff up, and that's what I spend, the early part of my day doing. If I'm going to be doing any kind of writing work, there's a block of time, a horizontal theme set aside just for reading, and I will read that stuff. It's very particularly defined. Like, let's focus on that. And then my writing workflow, I use drafts to kind of consolidate notes that I want to bring in, ideas that I've had, coalesce, those kind of ideas. I love drafts. I've loved it forever. It's such a great capture tool. And so for thoughts and ideas, and I will just walk around with my phone and capture those things via dictation. And again, on the iPad, it does it as well. And then what I'll do is, if I find something that really resonates and I want to use it for the book, I'll tag it, of course, with whatever the book title is inside of drafts initially. I'm still, and we didn't really get to the note-taking part of my software stack, but with Evernote no longer being part of it, I'm still on the hunt for, Obsidian seems to be where I've landed, but I'm still trying to figure out what that workflow looks like, getting things from drafts to Obsidian so they sit in a way that makes sense to me. That part is probably the fuzziest part of my workflow. So I typically just take things from drafts. I will sit with my Hemmingwrite, and I will look at a note in drafts on my phone, and I will start to expand on it. I will go through some of those things that are, kind of related to the book. I will highlight those tags, and I have a workspace built for that in drafts, so I can say, okay, well, I'm going to work on this. The other thing I will do, in case I want to just put my phone away completely, is I'll just, have some index cards, and I will write some of the bullet points that I want to use for whatever I'm going to write on for the book. So for example, the productivity diet, if I'm going to write about the 3 realms of productivity, which I talk about in the book, I will say, we're going to focus on, this realm of productivity. And I will just write the messy first draft inside of Hemmingwrite. It will link to Google Drive. And I have a folder set up in there for books, and I will put it in whatever book category it goes in. So for this one, it would go in the productivity diet book. For a subsequent book, it will go in another one. I tend to work on one book primarily, but if I have notes that are coming in that might go into a future book, I will put those in a future book as well. Sometimes I like to take a mental break on those, just to kind of keep things fresh for me. My writing time, though, is interesting because I tend to write post 2 p.m. From like 2 to 3 or 2 to 4, Monday through Friday. And then I also write in the evening. So from 11 to 1 in the morning. And then I will wrap up my day and go to bed and then get up the next day and start all over because I'm a night owl. And what's interesting is there's this London writers group, which I just joined. I literally was like, I want to really refine this and have some accountability along the way because, support is good. When you're a writer, it can be a very lonely craft, especially when you live on an island. There's a London writers group. And because I'm a night owl, there's 2 times where they get on a Zoom call and they just sit and they write. And I've actually signed up for those that happen at 2 p.m. Pacific time and then at midnight Pacific time. Because in London, it's actually early, it's a later night one for them and then an early in the morning one. And so I kind of allocate a horizontal theme to writing at those times of day. So I can get probably 2 to 3 hours of writing done just specifically on the book stuff or any books that I'm working on. During those timeframes. There are other writings I do, obviously email newsletters and things like that, but those don't go into those horizontal themes. Those are different categories. And I also don't use my Hemmingwrite for email newsletters or anything that's not related to a book. I will use, I'll use my iPad, for example. Sometimes I'll write things just in drafts for that. But that's my workflow is typically read in those reading apps that I have. And I have a few of them, but mostly Reader at this point. As well as Apple News, bringing things into drafts, going through drafts, and using those kind of cues that I have in drafts to start writing either for the book inside of my Hemmingwrite, my Freewrite, during those specific times of day, later in the day. And then for non-book stuff, I'll just typically write them in drafts and then get them into ConvertKit or wherever they need to go.
That's interesting to me that you use the Hemingwrite just to write books, that you don't do anything else there. Do you find that that gives you a little extra juice, for writing the books when you
Yeah.
have a device just for that?
Yeah, it does. And what it also does is it kind of tells me that this stuff that's in these folders, whether it's in Postbox, which is where the Freewrite stuff goes natively, or whether it's Google Drive, which is where I'm putting it, it tells me that this stuff is going in a book. So don't write a newsletter about it, or don't write a newsletter. Don't use this specific writing for the newsletter. Use it for, maybe it could be like, do a riff on it for a newsletter. Cause I will obviously I go through these drafts later. I mean, they're messy first drafts, but what it does, I've noticed this, and I'm sure anyone who's interviewed or read books and had podcast interviews or read a lot of nonfiction books, there's sometimes where I'll read a book and I'm like, wait a minute, didn't they send an email about this? Like this exact thing was like in an email that they sent. Or like it's almost like, it's not plagiarism, but it's very much like you've already written about this. And I know that, I mean, again, not everybody that reads that person's book will be following their email newsletter necessarily. But I don't want to read like Luke Burgess's latest book and then go, wait a minute, he already wrote about this in a newsletter and this is exactly what he wrote. So it kind of acts as a bit of a filter, a content filter for me as well. Not just to say this is for the book, but also the way this is written is for the book. Yes, I can riff on it in another medium, but it kind of, again, it separates book writing, because being an author is, anyone who's been blogging for a while, like writing a book is very different than writing a blog post or writing a newsletter. So it kind of creates that separation for me.
Yeah, they're totally different. I've done a couple of small book projects and I fall into the trap of like, oh, I've just written a bunch of related blog posts, right? Like I kind of think in that length, and it is funny how they're very different. And sometimes it can be really successful. Like The Martian kind of famously started life as a series of blog posts. And when you read the book, you can kind of tell in places that's how it works. I did want to ask you about the business of the book. I know that this book was a Kickstarter campaign. I've done a handful of those. How did that go, and why was that the route you went?
So why that went so well? It went well. We got like 200% of what we asked for.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It didn't cover all the costs, right? Because I went with a publisher who will not only handle distribution. I mean, they're the oldest publishing house in Canada. They are a pay-to-pay publisher, but they'll also do the audiobook version, which was huge. And see, the reason I decided to do this way instead of going the traditional publishing route because I do have a literary agent and I have a proposal that we're in the finishing touches for the next book on, but it allows me to do things like what Brandon Sanderson talked about in his Kickstarter campaign. And for those that don't know who Brandon Sanderson is, or he made a very successful Kickstarter campaign. He has a massive following. So make no mistake, when he had the most successful book Kickstarter ever. In fact, I think he has one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns ever, period.
It's like 40 something million.
Crazy amount. Yeah. And the reason he did it was because he wanted to be able to offer his books in a bundle, and traditional publishing doesn't allow that. He wanted people to be able to buy the audiobook, the physical paperback, and the ebook or the hardcover all in one bundle. And that's not the way traditional publishing has worked. So he just said, well, I want to do it this way, so this is what we're going to do. And I really wanted that ability too, to have that element of control. Plus, it kind of gave me agency over what it goes into, not only the process, but also it gave me not just agency, but insight as to what it goes into publishing a book. And I thought, oh, well, it'll take 6 months because we're self-publishing it. No, not necessarily. There was a paper shortage. People were talking about like a publishing paper shortage, and you have to deal with other people like editors, right? Who are like, and not just a content editor, but a line editor, and then design work. And they're working with multiple different books at the same time, even though you're paying to play. So the process has taken longer than I initially thought it would, but it gives me a good benchmark to go with when I'm either going to go traditional or if I want to self-publish again on my own, which I'm sure I'll want to do, because the one thing that happens when you do self-publish is not only do you have control of the process, most of the money comes back to you, as opposed. So if you're, if people who want to write a book to make money, it's a terrible idea. But if you at least want to have more control over the process, and at this point, self-publishing, there are so many good options out there that don't really look any different or much different than a traditionally published book. It's a viable option. So for me, it's been an educational process for sure, like an educational journey, but it's gratifying to see all the steps to know, all right, well, if I'm going to do this again, I'm not going to say that this is when it'll be ready. It'll take a little bit longer, or here are things I would do differently next time. So I'm excited for the process. One thing I will say, and I've told David this, is that as someone who wants to write and is a writer, when you get to the phase of, okay, we're in editing and now it's marketing and launching, your part of you goes, I just want to write the next book. Like, can't we just go on to the next bit? Like, can't we just, it's done now, let's move on. But that's not the way it works for self-publishing authors or even published authors. Like, there is a cycle, there is a process that you all, every author is following at this point. You're no longer just an author. You are now you're an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur for that book. You're publicizing the book. You're doing interviews. You're doing all that stuff. So that part has been fascinating. But the fact that I got the Kickstarter campaign backed at nearly 200% of the asking was very validating.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Ecamm. Ecamm Live is the leading video production and live streaming studio built for Mac OS. Ecamm does all aspects of video, not just live streaming. It's perfect for simplifying your workflow. It's easy enough to get started quickly, but powerful enough that you can create just about anything with video, all in the Ecamm app. One of my favorite features of Ecamm are the saved presets and scenes. So you can arrange everything you want, record it or stream it, and then come back to it later. And all of your settings, all your placement, your cameras, everything is where you left it. That's super awesome because very often in apps like this, you're kind of rebuilding your setup every time. And if you want consistency between recording or streaming sessions, that's a real time saver. So whether you're streaming, recording, podcasting, or presenting, everything you need is in Ecamm. Even support for multiple cameras and screen sharing and a live camera switcher lets you direct your show in real time. You can stand out from the crowd with high-quality video, add logos, titles, lower thirds, and graphics, share your screen, drop in video clips, bring on interviews, guests, use a green screen, and so much more. Ecamm Live does it all. Their members are entrepreneurs, marketing professionals, podcasters, educators, musicians, church leaders, bloggers, and content creators of all kinds. Get 1 month free at Ecamm, that's ECAMM, ecamm.com/MacPowerUsers, and use the code MacPowerUsers for a whole month free. Once again, that's ecamm.com/MacPowerUsers. Go there now to check it out. Our thanks to Ecamm for their support of the show. Mike, you've mentioned several times that you consider yourself a night owl. In the last segment, you're talking about the hours that you write, and in more power users, when we talk about my review, I'll share this too about me, that like I do my best writing between like 6 and 10 p.m., which is completely incompatible with having a family. Just I don't get to dive into that very often. But it sounds like you have been able to work that out, to work those late hours, and you've learned what time of day is best for you for certain times of work. And I would love to know how you got there. How did you discover this? How did you work toward it? And if someone is thinking about this sort of thing, where should they start?
I've known I've been a night owl for years, like decades. I mean, when I was doing comedy, that's when you do it. You do comedy at night. No one's really doing comedy for breakfast or comedy for, like that was just the way I kind of went down that path with my acting and comedy career in my early days back, just in between Costco or at the tail end of Costco, I was doing a lot of improv and stand up and things like that. But even as a kid, like, my daughter, even who just, as we're recording this, she's just turned 19. She's a night owl. Like we are born with certain body clock indicators that say, hey, this is the way you're kind of wired. And so luckily I've been able to kind of cultivate that ability to deliver the goods while still listening to my body clock for the majority of my working career, my business career. When I was working at Costco, again, being the person who would open up the service deli at, like, people had to be there at 6 or 7 a.m. That wasn't me. That's why I was glad I was in charge, because I'd be like, hey, guess what? You're going to be the opener and I will come in at like 10 and I will work the middle shift or I'll close. It's just always been that way for me. So when I started to run, Productivityist and MikeVardy.com, which is where we're headed, I really wanted to make sure I listened to that and honored my body clock, because I have been that person that tried to become an early riser or what have you. And, we have so many other things to fight. Like, why are we fighting our body clock? Like, why are we fighting our natural rhythms? Like, let's focus and concentrate on, how we can leverage that as a strength, as opposed to being it seen as a weakness. And for me, just being able to take a step back and look at the way my schedule operates and what kind of things I want to do, that thoughtfulness has allowed me to kind of say, okay, well, I know that I'm dealing with a lot of people on the East Coast. So the latest I can start my day really is 9 o'clock, right? That's like my Pacific time. So what do I do during that, like that early morning for me? What does that look like? And time crafting has kind of allowed me to look at, the framework that I've built has allowed me to say, okay, well, let's look at energy and intensity levels as indicators of when I should be paying attention to certain things. So, for example, in the morning, it's actually funny when we get on our focus calls as part of my community, people will invariably, if I'm on the morning call, they won't say, Mike, what are you working on? They're like, so is it low energy daily theme tasks for you today, Mike? I'm like, yep, absolutely. Like, that's what I'm going to be working, because they know me so well. I'm going to focus on that stuff. But my wife being more of a diurnal person, she's more of a 9 to 5er. So even when we have, when our kids were young, I would take the late shift, which means anything before 3 a.m., I'd be the one that would get up. And then anything after 3 a.m., she would get up. And now that my kids are older, like 19 and 13, I don't need to be up in the morning to get them off to school. Like, there is I think that's the biggest thing I think people need to know, is that if you've got kids, yes, there will be a window where it's not going to be compatible with you. I was talking to Hal Elrod the other day, actually, for an episode of my podcast, and he recently said that he's actually starting to stay up late 1 or 2 nights a week because his kids are now teenagers, and their body clock naturally skews later. Teenagers naturally skew their body clocks. They're more likely to stay up later and then sleep in, because that's just what's going on with them, right? And he's found that very challenging, because he's the guy that would get up at 3 a.m. So he's figuring out how to do that. Naps, I think, are going to be helpful for him as well, because that's what I do. I take an afternoon nap to kind of recalibrate myself. But yeah, I mean, I've just been able to kind of allocate. I'll look at my tasks and go, is this a task that requires high energy or low energy? If it requires low energy, I will do it earlier in the day. If it requires higher energy, I'll do it later in the day. And yeah, that 6 to 10 timeline, Stephen, it doesn't work for me either, because my family's still active. But because I'm a night owl, 10 to 1 will work. Like, everyone's in bed except for my daughter at that time. So I can sit down here and write, and I get the same kind of solitude and quiet that someone getting up at 3 a.m. will get. Right. So for me, that's been something that I've really been happy that I've been able to kind of cultivate and nurture. And one of the things I want to do is remove some of the stigma that's around night owls. First off, night owls don't necessarily stay up till 1 or 2 a.m. It's just they hit their productive stride later in the day. Like you, Steve. Like, Stephen, your productive stride, I'm imagining, is probably later in the day for stuff like this, right? So that doesn't mean you're like going to stay up till 2 a.m. It just means that you're, you kick it up starting at around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, right? And so the other thing that's funny about the term night owls is that many owls are not nocturnal. We associate it with it, but many aren't. So, and I'm really, what I really don't like is when you have praise going to the people who show up to the office at 7 in the morning or 8 a.m. before the workday starts. And they're called go-getters. They're, way to go. You're a team player. But the people that stay after 5 o'clock or whatever their time ends, because that's when they're better served, they're like, why are you still here? Why did you procrastinate so long? Maybe you need to, you should be home by now. Why are you a workaholic? It's like, no. Everyone's different. So that's the stigma that I want to kind of help people, get past, is this idea that we're all wired differently. And there are ways, thanks to technology largely, that we can work according to our circadian rhythms as opposed to counter to them.
I feel like there is definitely like this pride point for people that do their work at 5 a.m. There's books written on it, and everybody, like Chris Bailey did the experiment and productivity project where he tried to get up and do his work at 5 a.m. and found it worked. It was miserable and he couldn't get anything done. I feel like the big focus should be not what time do you do your work, but are you getting enough sleep? That's all, right? Yep. As long as you're getting enough sleep, you're good. If you're a night owl, that's cool, but make sure you sleep in so you get your 8 hours, or whatever it is you take. But I really like that you're pushing this, Mike. I don't think there are a lot of advocates out there. And just as your friend, I'll tell the audience, Mike is going to be making stuff about this. And I think there's a lot of people out in the world, like Steven, who do want to do their work at night. And there are workflows and techniques that can make that better. I'm glad that this is something you're pursuing.
It's definitely a mandate, a mission that I'm taking on, because it just because you don't get up at 5 a.m. doesn't mean you can't be productive. Like, I think that, and that's a lot of the message that goes around is, well, if you get up early, you're going to tackle, you seize the day, and the line, the early bird gets the worm, comes out a lot, but there's a second half to that idiom that was coined, which is, but the second mouse gets the cheese, right? So it just goes to show that you don't have to be an early riser to be productive. You could be a night owl, and I really want to help people with that. And actually, one of the things that I did inside of, speaking of reading and so on and so forth, that's why I love Apple News Plus, is that I actually have started to pull in from the different news sources. I created a subject called Night Owl, and there's a lot of stuff, and it's hilarious just to see how many articles are about night owls staying up late are higher risk of heart disease. Like, everything skews that way, but there's a lot of studies that go the other way that don't get talked about enough. And that's something else I'm going to be writing more about and exposing a bit more, is that, hey, we only hear one side of the argument, and it's time that we have a more balanced approach to this.
Mike, we always like to finish up these episodes sharing a few apps and services that bring you joy and delight. Lay some on us, buddy.
Well, I mentioned some of the apps that I've alluded to them already. LumaFusion, man, if it wasn't for LumaFusion, which I came across at VidCon about, half a dozen years ago, because my daughter and I went down there together. And they were a little outfit. They're just outside of Seattle, Washington, at least at the time. And they had this little tiny booth at VidCon. And it was some people who used to work for Adobe, I believe. And I think even maybe had a hand in some of the other apps that were centered around video editing. And they made this iPad app called LumaFusion that would, had a lot of the things that you would have to either pay for After Effects and all that stuff for Adobe, or in the Apple world, like Final Cut, but there's also Motion and all the other aspects. It had everything built into this iPad app. And we're talking 6 years ago, at least. I love using it. It's gotten me better video results than using, let's say the blanket iMovie. And I don't own Final Cut Pro. I'm sure Final Cut Pro would do the same and more. But it's whenever I use it and pull out my Apple Pencil and start playing with it, and it's one of the ones that really brings me a lot of joy to use. And it allows me to do some of the stuff I want to do visually that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise, very simply and easily. Drafts always brings me joy. Like, I really need to tap into it a bit more too. That's another one that, makes just my writing a lot easier, and just getting things out of my head a lot easier too. If only my wife's only complaint is, why do you dictate to your phone so darn much? Like, really, you need to start typing. Like, no, I speak far, far better and far faster than I type. So
do you do the thing in drafts where you push the button and it opens a new note and turns on the microphone?
Yep.
That's a great feature. Yeah.
Yep. Love it. Apple News Plus, I don't think Apple News gets nearly enough love, and I think there's still more that it can do. They just added The Athletic actually today when I opened it up. I'm like, oh, The Athletic. And The Athletic is it's a deeper sports kind of news site. There's been some great articles, like more personal ones that athletes have written. So I added that to my mix, but it allows me to really curate from news sources. And being in Canada, it's trickier now because there is a law in Canada that doesn't allow news sites to publish on Facebook because Facebook is not paying they're not giving any money to Canadian news sites. So therefore it's been kind of blocked. So having the ability to search for news sites at the source, which I always like to do anyways, is really nice, especially because I can segment things. Plus they got the crosswords and stuff in there as well. So I think Apple News Plus is something that I really like using.
One of the features you mentioned, though, I think people don't realize is the ability to create your own custom news feeds in it.
Yes.
I think that can be really useful. Explain how you do that.
It's incredibly useful. I mean, again, I can see Night Owl stuff. I can see time management stuff. I can see stuff around topics that already exist. Like if I want to keep up with the New Jersey Devils hockey team, they're already there. If I want to keep up with, again, any various, Vision, if you want to type in Vision Pro, and that's a topic, it will pull anything that's in their News Plus kind of feeds. It can all be fed to one. So you can really curate it, which is really nice. This goes back, the next app kind of goes back to the whole, when you were talking about calendar and letting the tasks automatically populate, which is one of the things that calendar apps are starting to do. This is why I use You Need a Budget, YNAB, for my money instead of something like Mint, although Mint has gone away. But any of the tools that automatically pull things in, You Need a Budget has really helped me personally and for my business kind of keep on top of the finances. The strategies that they offer, and I know Jesse Meekum wrote a whole book. He's the founder of You Need a Budget, wrote a book called You Need a Budget. But the You Need a Budget system, it reminds me a lot of the envelope system to a degree. Give every dollar a job, that kind of thing. It really is nice to keep on top of my finances, and it's a real pleasure to use, both on mobile and on the web.
I can tell you on that app, every time it comes up on the show, we get a ton of email from people that love this app. And we've never really given it the coverage it deserves, but this is people who use it love it. I mean, I don't know what else to say. And if you're looking for budget software on a Mac, that should be a good sign.
It's fantastic, and it's nice to see your money age and all that stuff. It's really cool. And again, it's a simple system that allows you to kind of, keep your, we talk about the two things that people, the resources that we should be managing that help us, lead better lives. Time and money are the two, as far as the big two. So for me, that was huge. And then finally, another one that is new, and actually it's funny, because this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning when we all kind of met. Ecamm. I've been using that a lot more as my streaming / recording, the virtual cam, all that stuff. I had the pleasure of running into Doc, who I had forgotten that we even had run across into each other. It didn't dawn on me until a friend introduced us, a mutual friend, and he's like, Mike Vardy. I'm like, back in the TUAW days, like meeting him at Macworld and stuff. And our worlds collided again at Podcast Movement this past August in Denver. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm working for Ecamm now. And we had a chat about it. And it's been a really big addition to the tech stack in terms of doing live streams and especially the podcast. Cause like Mac Power Users, the A Productive Conversation podcast our feed is now on YouTube as well. It pulled a bunch of stuff in. Over 500 episodes, and to be able to use it for recording podcast interviews and using some of that for video if I want, or just having live streams, it's been super helpful and really powerful. Great Mac software. So I'm a big fan of what Ecamm's doing, and that's probably I'd say those five when you are the ones that are kind of when I open them, I feel all warm and fuzzy because I get to use these apps that I'm really leaning into more and more.
And I'll just let the audience know, Ecamm is a sponsor of this episode, although Mike did not know that. So that's an endorsement from the guest.
There you go.
In addition to the fact that they're sponsoring us, and we do appreciate that. Mike, if people want to learn more about Night Owl productivity or the productivity diet and all the things you're doing, where should they go?
Well, productivityist.com is still the main website, although we are shifting over to mikevardy.com because my array of work is spreading, beyond just being productivity oriented. I'm definitely leaning into the idea of time and space, Night Owl stuff. So you can go to productivityist.com. I'm also still hanging out on Twitter /X, Mike Vardy there. And also pretty much any other platform you'll find me as Mike Vardy if you want to connect with me socially.
Yeah, well, keep in touch with us, Mike. Let us know. I think this Night Owl thing is a big deal. I think a lot of people could use the advice. I know you're doing a lot of work on it, and I love to hear what you're thinking about Apple Tech. So thanks for coming on the show today, Mike. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. We also have a forum at talk.macpowerusers.com. And thanks to our sponsors today, 1Password, Squarespace, and Ecamm. In the More Power Users episode, which is the extended ad-free version of the show, we're going to be talking about Steven's short little 6,100 word review of the Vision Pro and more thoughts on the Vision Pro now that we've been using it a week. We're going to try and convince Mike to trade in his Hemingway for one. We'll see how that goes. And we'll see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, everybody.